a sort of series on our freedom topic. This is going to be a episode 3. And so I was telling you today that how thrilled I am just to be covering these topics in detail, because it entails a lot of really important information and I believe practical utility as well. And it just feels at home to my soul to be contributing in whatever way I can to this kind of like great work of fleshing out these ideas for not only myself, but hopefully empowering others in any little way as well. And especially when we find ourselves in situations where we're coming up close and personal with tyranny or tyrannical forces in whatever form. And I think it's important that we're armed to the best of our ability with the mental and spiritual tools to best fortify ourselves. And yeah, this is where I kind of find like psychological interpretations of biblical stories particularly valuable. At least they speak to me a lot more than some of the other things I hear. And someone I draw a lot of inspiration from is Jordan Peterson. It may not be up everyone's alley. A lot of people, don't like him and whatnot. But for me, he does instill something in me that kind of makes me contemplate and think a lot about different ideas and topics along these lines. So something he talks about that I wanted to kind of bring up is this idea of the spirit of voluntary play versus a power and dominance hierarchy predicated on invitation versus compulsion. So I love that. And I think to exemplify this, he relays like the biblical Exodus story in a really interesting way, where he says Exodus or exodos, or the way forward, is the archetypal narrative of progression from tyranny and chaos into the future. So I wanted to get your thoughts, Ike, on this, because he poses this really cool question: what is the highest spirit that could guide you? And I think it's his contention that in regards to the Exodus, the highest spirit is that which objects to tyranny and that calls the enslaved to freedom. And then I think he says like that's what God is in the Exodus story. And if you live by that God, then you believe that tyranny is implicitly wrong, including, most importantly, self-tyranny. And his association is that this is essentially the voice that speaks to Moses, that sort of divinely inspires insight and compels his actions moving forward. So perhaps, relatively, when we discuss the Daimon, I wonder, this may tie in or at least be related to that voice that speaks, whether it's, metaphorical or not. But if the Daimon is that sort of like intermediary link in between our conscious experience in this material realm and, the above or the spiritual landscape, then it seems like it could be similar, like that's what it's referring to perhaps. So I kind of wonder your thoughts about that voice or that spirit in this example in particular. Do you see that as like Moses being in tune with his Daimon, or is this outside maybe it's like an outside separate or another divine sort of inspiration when that voice is coming to him? It kind of seems like it's not like demiurgic, with this sort of contention of like liberation from tyranny in the Exodus story. So I wanted to get your thoughts on that to kind of open this up.
I mean, it's a good question. There is some parallel, I think. My first inclination is to balk anytime I hear something about the Old Testament kind of being anti-tyrannical, just because there is so much in the Old Testament that is kind of, I am a jealous and vengeful God.
Yeah.
You will not worship any other gods before me, etc. But you kind of hit on something here, which is immediately jumps out to me. I know that this is a little bit of an interpolation, right? But I think it can be significant in its interpretation by way of kind of what you're alluding to. So the biblical God, you know, the ineffable name of that God is Yahweh. You know, comprised of the Hebrew letters Yod, He, Vav, He, the Tetragrammaton. Now, on the Kabbalistic tree of life, that is not the highest name, which is interesting. So there's a correlation there between the Gnostic idea of the Demiurge and then the God above God, the Neoplatonic sort of absolute, which was an elaboration of Plato's. In some sense, it was an elaboration of Plato's Agathon. Right around Middle Platonism, you start to see the idea of the Demiurge and the Agathon. While the Demiurge was actually made more of an ignorant figure in the Middle Platonic school, whereas in Plato's conception, or at least the way that he illustrated it by way of particular, specifically Pythagorean figures in his dialogues, the Demiurge was good, was beneficent. But you have this encounter between Moses and God, right? And it's epic. It's one of the coolest stories. That's what makes the Old Testament worth reading. I mean, you're not going to get any more epic than some of these stories. But when Moses asks him who he is, he doesn't say Yahweh. God doesn't say, I am Tetragrammaton or Yod He Vav He or whatever Hebrew or Proto-Semitic Aramaic rendering. He says Aheye Ashur Aheye, meaning I am that I am. And that's really interesting because that is the highest name on the Kabbalistic tree of life. So it seems to be alluding to this connection with something higher. And I think that's kind of cool to understand the idea of, you know, ex hodos, meaning the way out, really. To be understanding, you know, to understand that as being the way towards, yes, like you were saying, that which abhors slavery and bondage. But the thing is, you know, he comes down with these commandments, and so you can think to yourself like, okay, he's saying, you know, you got to leave this ruler, but now I'm your ruler and you got to follow these rules. But the interesting thing is that the conception of a lot of those laws and those rules had to do with, as at least, you know, elaborated or expounded by the prophets that came after. They had to do with the nation of Israel, you know, the Hebrews, the early Hebrews, engaging in behaviors which were going to make them slaves again, you know, going to put them into bondage to themselves, you know, worshiping false idols, you know, the golden calf. It's like, yeah, it's an emblem of materiality, if nothing else, you know. It's like, yeah, this is, you're going the wrong way. Because from a Gnostic point of view, and certainly I think from a pure, you know, gospel-based Christian point of view, New Testament point of view, yeah, materiality is kind of incompatible with spiritual attainment, or at least enslavement to it, you know, like buying into the illusion of reality. Like, you know, you have to make sure your needs are met to a certain degree, right? Christ only made it, like, Christ willingly went to the cross, but he still ate every day, you know, to like keep himself alive. So it's an interesting parallel. I do, to talk about the daemon, or daimon as this divine intermediary, I think is a little bit more to the point. I think it's, you know, again, to go back to the Platonic dialogues, there's this, like, Socrates, right, is this paragon of philosophy, and he's this paragon of brilliance and wisdom, so much so that he has effectively become immortalized. And that's crazy to think that span of time. I mean, how many musicians and like authors and people have come to the prominence in the last 20 years and you don't hear word one about them anymore, you know? But yet this guy, we've been talking about for 2,500 years. It just blows my mind. But a lot of people have this conception that to be brilliant and to be wise is to know a lot of things. Whereas like Socrates didn't say that he knew a lot of things. You know, his whole dialectic was predicated on the idea that, like, I have no idea what you're saying, and you probably have no idea what you're saying. I don't understand any of this, so let's work it out. But he adheres to these principles that ultimately, these dialectical principles, which are, you know, ultimately the path to sort of discursively uncovering how little we actually know. And that was, you know, you read him today and you're like, it doesn't make any sense. You know, it's a bunch of like, yes, Socrates, no, Socrates. But on the same token, like, they do lead somewhere. They do speak, like you were saying, like, my soul feels at home. Like, the soul feels at home in those truths. There is something perennially true about, you know, the deductions that they arrive at. And one of the things that, you know, you scratch your head and you say, like, well, how can you be wise and say that you don't know anything? Socrates, well, as Dr. Greg Shaw pointed out to me, Socrates does say that he understands eros, you know, the divine love or desire. But he also many times, or several times, references his daimon, his guiding spirit. That's how he knew, you know, to stay or to go, to leave a place or remain there, or, you know, basically what he should and shouldn't do. And he was in connection with that, with the Agathodaimon, right? The guide of good counsel. And that really, in my personal estimation, and it's not going to be what anybody wants to hear, and I'm sorry to have to tell you, but it's only the ego, the persona, me, as I think of myself. I have to put myself in abeyance to the promptings of that higher being. Now, the thing is, how do I know I'm in touch with that being? And that's essentially the course of initiation. I mean, the 5 equals 6 grade or degree of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn has, you go through all the subgrades again. So you're a neophyte, Zelator, you're a neophyte Adeptus Minor, a Zelator Adeptus Minor, you know, Theoricus Practicus, Philosophus. You essentially undergo the elemental grades through the lens of this particular initiation and planetary influence of the sun. It's a solar grade. You're in Tiferet, really. But the entire time you're there, no matter how much magic they throw at you, how much divination, you know, how much alchemy, how much this, that, the other thing, your avowed purpose in that grade that determines when you get to move on, if you get to move on, is to make contact with your higher divine genius. Again, genius being Thomas Taylor's word for Daimon, which is what they would have been reading. You know, Thomas Taylor famously translated a lot of the Neoplatonic stuff, and I think the entire Platonic corpus. He was brilliant. But yeah, man, and that's the whole thing. It's like you have to get in touch with that thing, and it's, I can't tell you what that's going to look like for you, but it's definitely going to resemble, you know, the alchemical solve et coagula, and ultimately several times it will culminate in you making what I love this term, you will have to make the cosmic apology, which is to say and mean from your heart, I was wrong. And that's not something people can do anymore. You know, we can't do it. Everybody's a fucking expert, and nobody wants to be. I mean, they will die on their fucking hills, man. But you have to be willing to say, like, no, I was completely wrong. I had it backwards. You know, that's the cosmic apology. And that essentially is like Inanna, you know, journeying into the underworld and having to be divested of her clothing and her jewelry and everything. At the several gates of initiation, you will have to gradually be divested of everything. And until you can say I was wrong, you're probably not going to to set down that which is weighing you down, you know? Yeah. So that's part of that process. But ultimately, contact with the daimon is the highest freedom we can hope to have. It turns us into the heroes of Greek mythology, really, you know, rather than you had this whole cult of worship that was predicated on high priests making supplication to specific gods. Oh, well, we burn the animal fat, you know, we wrap the bones in the animal fat and we burn it at this hour, and it's auspicious timing for the, but eventually we see a transition. It's no longer supplication to the gods. It's a person themselves becoming like a god, having that stature and that purity of consciousness. I don't want to say power. People love to say power. The ego has to divest itself completely of its power. Completely. Oh, I got news for you. All the Wiccans out there and neo-pagans talking about who and what stands in power. You're going the wrong fucking way. That's not the way you go. You don't go further into me, what I can do, what I think is right. You have to divest yourself of all that horseshit. I'm sitting here speaking to you because I am following the promptings of my higher genius. This is, you know, like, not everybody wants to sit here at a microphone and talk about all this stuff. Yeah, I'm very passionate about it, but a lot of this stuff also scares the shit out of me. You know, like, to talk about and put myself out there and you know, but you have to adopt the virtues, you know, and one of the cardinal virtues of the Platonic corpus is courage, and you have to be courageous when you make contact with that higher genius, and it kind of conspires in your life by either direct communication with you because you have developed that, you've learned to cultivate a state of receptivity enough to connect and receive actual messages, or whether it comes in the form of dreams, synchronicities, divinations, astral experiences. All these ways will synthesize, you know, really your entire life becomes like this waking dream, and you're just going around interpreting all these omens. And it sounds batshit crazy, but at the end of the day, the proof is in the pudding, you know, because when you arrive someplace that you know you're supposed to be, because you followed these, you know, what a lot of us like to call breadcrumbs, and you look back and you're like, wow, I could not have planned that better. Then the way it kind of sort of haphazardly came together. You know, intuition, things like this. These are all modes of speaking with the higher divine genius. But the thing is, there's a lot of pitfalls. You could be listening to another voice You know, there's in the Greek cosmology, it wasn't just the Agathodaimon, the guide of good counsel. There was the Kakodaimon, and we don't like to talk about that, but that was the guide of bad counsel. Okay, you know, that's the one in you that when your soul knows, not in your head, in your heart, that something is wrong, but there's that little itch, I want it anyway. That's when that voice of equivocation comes. And, you know, it's that classic thing, an angel on one shoulder, a devil on the other. It really is. That is the human dichotomy. And that was, but it's not that cartoonishly and easily summed up. You know, it has to do with the fact that we are ultimately these spiritual consciousnesses that are bound to materiality, and the material part of ourselves is in itself what is dragging us, pulling us downward towards, you know, things that make sense in the world, but not spiritually, not in the heart. They make sense to the head occasionally. And that's the whole thing. If you're still a person who is sort of encumbered by this indecisiveness, this equivocation, this rationalization, and this just being in love with the fact that there's all this gray area and morality isn't objective, then you're way off the fucking path. You know, there are archetypes of human experience that you are making yourself incapable of experiencing or interacting with. So you're basically saying, like, I'm going to embody this one archetype, and because of these beliefs, I'm going to shut myself off to what is essentially a magical universe, because there's all these parts of myself that I have to either numb, bury, or throw in a closet to be able to go through with the things that my head, my ambition, you know, or whatever else, your lusts, your appetites, they want what they want, and that's what they think is best. So you're going to find all these little reasons and these logical loopholes and do all these mental gymnastics to justify this is, you know, this doesn't exist, you know, absolute good doesn't exist. But at the end of the day, like, the crime is the punishment itself. You know, there is a part of your soul that is violated, and we know that. You know, I mean, I had to learn that the hard way. I was somebody who was so reptilian for so long. You know, my intellect was like a forked-tongued snake convincing me to do all these things. And I thought I had reached the pinnacle of enlightenment because look at how free I am. I can do anything I want. Well, no, you can't, right? Because my consciousness, my perspective was so, you know, I had like the blinders on that they put on horses in like a horse race, and I didn't understand that I was training myself to become a slave to my own desires. So now there are things that I can't say no to. There are areas where I don't have, I used to have more self-control than I do now, because I put myself through that regimen of like, yes, I want it, I couldn't have it, I'll take it now. That's freedom. And what happens is, no, you're strengthening that downward force, that material force. The higher part of you, the intellective, the divine, and I don't mean intellective in terms of intellectual, I mean it in the Neoplatonic sense, the part of you that is still connected with the divine mind, which contemplates the eternal forms, you know, eternally. It doesn't necessarily want to be doing those things, you know, because you are enchained, it's almost like a deer trapped in headlights. You are entranced, is what I'm trying to say. You are entranced by the darkness of materiality. You have become seduced by the formula of decay, and you go on, you press onward in these things, insistently telling yourself that this is what is right, what is, you know. And then what happens is, after a couple of years, maybe a decade of seeing your philosophy, right, put into action, you look around, you're like, I have made a royal fucking mess. I have shit the bed 6-7 times. I cannot be in control of my life anymore. Something else has to step in here. but you kind of deferring to the higher is the beginning of that process. And for me, that silent, I never said it out loud, but I knew it in my heart. I was wrong. I made that cosmic apology, and immediately, before any initiation ever took place, I literally spoke out. I spoke to, my conception of the highest, and I said, like, look, I have made a mess. I can't make the best decisions. I don't have the perspective. So guide me. And ultimately, when you talk to the absolute, what you're really talking to is the part of you that stands before it, the aspect of your spiritual architecture, which is bornless. And that is your higher divine genius. Some people would call it the Daimon. Some people might call it the holy guardian angel. I tend to steer away from anything that exteriorizes it. It is a part of your spiritual architecture. You are connected to it. It's not you. It's not your ego. It's not your persona, but nonetheless, it is still there to guide you as this still small voice, and it will consistently give you signs, but you must be attentive to it. You must constantly revert your attention to it and defer to it. You have to defer. Your higher divine genius can tell you something, and then you go do something else. Eventually, you do that enough, you're going to lose the connection, probably. But you really, the only way, that's the only way we achieve freedom. And there's a quote, and I forget which saint or church father said it, but to paraphrase, the free man is a slave to God. Like, the truly free man is nothing but a slave to God. And I'm not talking about that in terms of religiosity. What I'm talking about now is that exactly what I've been talking about. You have to submit your own wills to the ordinances of your higher divine genius, the part of you that can see the bigger picture. And even if it doesn't make sense, you have to have faith. You have to have trust and push forward in that direction regardless, because I've resisted and it don't work, right? You build a sandcastle, it will kick it fucking down over and over again until you submit, especially once you've made that, you've made your intention clear, right? How many rituals have I been through? How many prayers have I intoned? How many times have I sincerely sat in a visualization or meditative state and said, please guide me? So you set that intention, and then if you sort of backpedal on it, you're going to get kicked down. It's like, you said you wanted this. But it's not love and light, and it's not easy, and likely it will challenge every preconception you have to what a spiritual life looks like.
Absolutely. Yeah. I guess resistance is to piss in the wind, I hear. But you could apply that both ways, I guess. But definitely painted a picture of how we can comprehend freedom and free will, and perhaps the abuse thereof, and how the abuse of one can invert itself into the other. Like, one's freedom of pursuing desires taken to the extreme can end up enslaving you, for sure.
Oh yeah.
And everything always has a natural consequence. And with these two diametrically opposed diamonds that you're speaking about, which, which one are you going to attune yourself to? Which one are you going to listen to? Within that principle of polarity there, with the angel on one shoulder and the demon on the other, so to speak. I think that's always at play with everything, and it's up to our intuition to kind of interpret and hopefully make the right decisions and choices and how we express our freedom within that spectrum. And sort of like a follow-up question, because we've spoken about natural law, and I wonder, do you believe that fate as a natural law, do you believe that it punishes tyrants ultimately?
I think that the attitude, behavior, and worldview of a tyrant is itself a punishment, right? They're not letting in any egalitarian spirit. There's probably very little sense of belonging to the community around them. There's likely, frankly, a shriveled feeling capacity, right? And there's probably a heightened or enlivened sense of masochism and enjoyment in the pain of others, or at least the subjection of others. So that in and of itself is a fucking punishment, my friend. I mean, it's almost like you are punished before you even become the tyrant. You know, the fact that you are a tyrant is sort of the punishment itself, because you are literally blind to all spiritual virtue, and that ultimately is what you are.
Yeah.
Now,
definitely.
one of the things that I really contemplate is that, okay, let's say for a time, my persona exists as an etheric kind of shell, right? I guess you call them apparitions or whatever it would be. still containing some sort of like almost automaton like semblance of very low level consciousness. And then let's also think about the higher part that is sort of realizes that it kind of retracts to a certain location, its downward projection into materiality, and then says has been, there's a couple of different schools of thought about it, but just regardless of who thinks what, let's look at it as an analogy here, potentially. Let's say that my consciousness, has been conditioned by the life I have lived and the choices I've made, and now has all these material inclinations and desires, right? Whatever it is. I mean, you miss fucking Taco Tuesdays, you miss your wife, you miss your kids, or you die early and without so many things going unsaid, and feeling like your life you've left people unable to fend for themselves. I mean, how are you going to walk away from that and walk into the light? You're going to have these attachments and these desires because your consciousness has been completely conditioned by materiality. That's essentially what that purgatory state is like, you kind of coming out of the trauma of material existence. Now that would be a kind of hell in and of itself. I have all these desires, all these emotions, and they're fiery hot, and I have no physical way of manifesting them. I can't do the things that my consciousness wants to do because I have no physical vehicle anymore. I mean, that in and of itself is hell. It's punishment. And I think that there's a big reason that everybody, or a large percentage, enough for it to be this kind of like cliche, of people who have had like near-death experiences, regardless of whether or not they've been out of body, always say like, your life flashes before your eyes. Well, that is a species of the 42 assessors we were talking about. What did I do? Do I oh god damn, I regret this and this and that, and man, I'm going to miss this, and man, I love this person. You don't often get a chance to take a quote unquote disembodied vacation from your life for long enough, at least, to realize it, to look at your life at the things that you've done wrong, the things that you've done right, and really take a full account. Take some time to feel everything, really feel it,
Nice.
and like,
be nice if that was built into our day-to-day operations, to take that time. What a society we'd have. And yeah, perhaps tyranny gets punished as well by individuals uprising around the tyrant, because it seems like it is a pattern of history that the response to tyranny or tyrants is this sort of organic uprising that occurs as a result. So like
Yeah, but as the saying goes, sic semper tyrannis, always to the tyrants. It doesn't matter. You could be the brightest-eyed, bushiest-tailed young idealist. I constantly, I love that line from the second of Christopher Nolan's Batman movies, where Harvey Dent says, "You either die a hero or live long enough to see yourself become the villain," and that's ultimately right, because we're on the wheel. We're on the wheel, and you might be the liberator now, but if you can't relinquish that power and walk away, you will be the tyrant again, because it has very little to do with it. It has more to do with the fact that materiality is a cycle. It's a formula, and you can picture it like a spinning wheel. The more you engage with it, the more you are going to, I'll put it this way, the more you engage with it on its own terms, the more you are going to suffer the consequences of that wheel. Because you should engage with materiality, but not on its own terms in every iteration.
Absolutely. Yeah, and so I wonder, when it comes to the nature and structure of order, or preferably ordered systems and structures. So when I talked to Jamie Lamb and yourself, you both really illuminated me a lot in terms of my understanding of astrology. And I think it was the thing that Jamie had said, where we were discussing I think you said the Omonic observations as the precursory sort of data pool of hundreds or thousands of years of observations that was collected to kind of essentially map out these recordings of these cosmic patterns and these correlations between georeferential astrology and the events or energies made manifest on Earth. And it just kind of made a lot of sense to me when it was put that way. And so I bring this up sort of in relation to, just recognizing patterns and cycles in the sky and in relation to events on Earth, because we can also look back to history and the historical mythologies and stories of the past and look at the different patterns, and we could look there as well, and within what repeats within mass group settings or mass conglomerations of civilizations, and how they rise and fall or are disbanded, but also how the principles of virtue play out. Because, for example, say back to the Moses thing, say Moses and the context that surrounds him was sort of indicative of something like the understanding of just judgment, like justice, thousands of years ago, and him acting as this sort of mediator, as essentially some kind of king of conflict resolution and a great exemplar archetype, so potently. And how, extending forward thousands of years later to the present day, looking back as modern people, we can kind of recognize these things that play out. And I think looking at these stories in this sort of light, it can be super beneficial, kind of as you had previously mentioned about cycles repeating and patterns of behavior repeating, and this sort of wide holistic view really helps us understand the nature and the principles of this sort of natural order, perhaps, of not only cosmic archetypes but virtuous expressions or behaviors that form or arise, and how things play out, or potentials of how they can and will, at least if not mitigated, in the negative. And so I think one of the morals of that particular story, with the Moses story, is maybe you just can't obviously ever have one guy, one pharaoh or whatever, dictating the masses of the people. And it's for one, it's a mathematical impossibility. For two, you can't enslave people sustainably, I don't think. Karma's not going to play out well. So perhaps in creating this idea of creating a hierarchy of distributed responsibility in order to be able to manage and effectively keep tyranny at bay, I think that might be a good model somehow. I guess I would have to be like built into the system of the group, ethics perhaps, and if so, perhaps it's a worthy model for general like governance. But obviously it would take like a true communication and teaching and understanding of these archetypal principles, and maybe this sort of system is something that creates ordered freedom. I don't know, and it like as like a natural, I don't know if that's like a natural like cooperative human inclination or not to order itself in that way. And I don't know how much like animal instinct would take over things if, say, things were like reset and start over from scratch. And the idea of ordered freedom, it's like almost, it seems paradoxical because the ordered freedom seems paradoxical, but perhaps it is like this sort of ordered freedom that allows healthy freedom to be sustained and regenerated. Perhaps I'm kind of just like throwing a lot of things out there and really genuinely curious, like, is there any way we could, like, if you were to contemplate and think of a way, if you had like this restart, or this tribe that was just individualized and on its own out in the middle of the nowhere or whatever, that had respawn, is there any way that there is some kind of system that could be put in place, like a sort of like seed that would sprout and grow and proliferate and maintain its sort of DNA of freedom as like a preserved asset, like as an integral aspect that would like maintain itself? Like, or would it always just inevitably have these individuals within it that would sprout up and do the opposite? Like, what are your thoughts on all
that? People talk, there's a lot of conjecture and opinion, and even just scientific research about about human nature, and all things being equal, I think that human beings aren't necessarily, there's a part of human beings that is inherently good, and there is a part of human beings that is inherently scared. Okay. Right, exactly what we're talking about in the different aspects of the soul, the higher and the lower. The higher part of the soul still kind of in touch with the divine mind, the lower part tied to the body as with a rope. So to me, a lot of that manifests in this evening out, this kind of neutral state. And I think in terms of human beings as we are now, if we are anything, we are programmable. We are inherently monkey see, monkey do. People don't want to admit that. They want to think to themselves like, oh, well, that's true of other people, but not of me. But watch your behaviors and your feelings. Notice even tensions in your body that arise when there are certain cues that are given to you, whether that's, this via social media or television, movies. Look at all of our media. Even literature has become politicized to the nth degree. Conversation has become politicized to the nth degree. And it's this kind of snowball effect, this feedback loop based on our psychology, that we will inherently do what the people around us are doing. But that doesn't account for people who rebel against that, because there are people who rebel against that. Poetically, we could say they've been around a lot longer in terms of lives, They know the kind of like line of bullshit that is waiting for them when they reincarnate to this this fucking rock. But
the beautiful rock, Ike.
It's great. It's wonderful. But the beauty is part of the illusion that keeps us coming back here, which at the end of the day isn't necessarily a great thing. Socrates says it, Plato says it through Socrates, you are just as enthralled to materiality when you are miserable.
All right, so I said it's a beautiful world, and then you said you were talking about something along the lines of being enthralled by this materiality. Let you go ahead and pick up on that.
Yeah, I mean it is beautiful, but that the beauty that is within it is an imperfect reflection of the perfect forms, which are ultimately, they exist beyond. Everything here is subject to decay and dissolution and change, and are becoming overly desirous for things here, specifically things. I'm not talking necessarily even about relationships, but having these so many different attachments to things here, that is kind of a trap, and keeps us here in this cycle of pain and suffering and things like that. And look, I'm not somebody who thinks that you should be happy all the time. I think that is a fucking ridiculous, ludicrous aspiration. What would get done? Like, how is happiness the end itself? What happens after that? Like, there's so much else to think about, but we've been in these little cages of material comfortability for so long that it's like, well, how do I take care of myself? That involves some sort of sacrifice and pain, it becomes this escapism, this bar that we can kind of morph it, we can change it, we can place it wherever we want based on a justification for our own aversion or avoidance to suffering and pain, which is just as much a part of life and growing, evolving spiritually, and materially as happiness is. It can't all be about reward, that otherwise motivation goes out the fucking window, if you're just constantly in a state of reward. And you will atrophy, and all parts of you will atrophy and become stuck. And it's that thing where that Socrates says, or Plato says through Socrates, you are just as much enthralled to the illusion of materiality when you are miserable as you are when you are in great joy, because you're vesting, you're putting your faith in the reality of what is ultimately illusory. And there's a whole other part of yourself, and there's that kind of like quote unquote Gnostic itch that deep down it's that void, that hunger for the beyond, for the highest conception of consciousness and being that we have, that is that that itch that we never seem to scratch, no matter how much money we have, no matter how big of a house we've got, how much praise and acclaim has been heaped upon us. It's ultimately, I mean, that is a lesson that has been around for such a long time that it's amazing to me that people are still chasing that carrot, but that's the whole thing. I think that if we wanted to talk about things that, like, okay, what would I do in that situation? Well, here's the interesting thing. Socrates' students actually come to him, right? It's the whole premise of the Republic. He's asked by a group of interlocutors and students, hey, what do you think is the perfect society? And Socrates basically, he doesn't really want to answer the question. He's like, this is because it's a trap. It's a fucking trap. A lot of people don't realize the etymology of the word utopia. This is a great way of like how words just get changed. Utopia, you say utopia, you think of a perfect place, right?
Yeah, right.
Utopia was chosen to describe as a descriptor for the perfect society because it means nowhere. Utopia means nowhere. So when in the choice of using that word to describe a perfect society was a way of saying this will never happen. It can't. uh so um that's kind of the bullet that Socrates is dodging, but he's pressed and he says, look, small agrarian farming communities, those are what's best. And then the students basically press him and they're like, well, what about war? Like, there's going to be like people who, this is essentially the question you just asked me, is like, what if other people choose not to fall in line with that? And then he delineates this very bleak future that a lot of people, when they read the Republic, they're like, oh my God, this is disgusting. This is terrifying. And he's supposed to be, spiritually and mystically inclined and philosophically enlightened. And he's talking about eugenics and taking children away from their parents and stuff like that. It's at a young age. It's like, yeah, because, this is the inevitable problem. If you want to have, you have to defer it. Like, what's the definition of perfect? What's the definition of most elevated? What are we talking about when we choose to have that conversation? For somebody else, it might be eternal happiness. For other people, it might be eternal peace. Well, what if what makes somebody happy is to fucking go around like taking your shit? It makes them happy. They feel fulfilled. Then what do you do? This is the problem with the realm in which we live. It's not the problem, it's the challenge, and it's the reality. And a lot of people, they don't want to face the reality because a lot of them they've managed to avoid reality for a really long time. I think the surest possible way of knowing that violence is sometimes necessary in the world is having experienced it. If you experience violence, that like, wow, if I ever am put in this situation again, I need to have a way to protect myself. And a lot of people, our modern society has removed that kind of thing. But the thing is, there's still a ton of horrors, right? It's like, oh, well, we're not, it's not like it was, and people aren't getting dragged out of their homes and raped and killed. But aren't they? Isn't crime like just as fucking, I mean, there's so many more people in the world right now, and we live in these disgusting vertically dense cities, which is like just a bunch of apes thrown in a cage, and they're starting to tear each other apart because that's not how you're supposed to, like, you're the most interior part of yourself is like, this is an abomination to it, that lifestyle. And so there's still cancer, there's still AIDS, people are getting thrown in front of trains, there's nuclear war, there's fucking biological war. So this whole bullshit pipe dream defense of like, it's better now is fucking horseshit. And that's, again, it's like, it's such bullshit. Nature's gonna have her death toll, friend. That's just that she demands it. It's that circle where it's the anabolic and the catabolic. It's got to build up, then to break down. It's the only way things work. But yeah, you got to cultivate people who understand that. And that's part of this ladder of virtues that essentially is developed out of Platonism. Principally, I want to say by Porphyry, but there's this like anonymous prolegomena that kind of, but avoiding all technicalities, we have essentially what amounts to several stages of virtue, and it's these virtues ultimately which, Socrates, Plato, Plotinus, Porphyry, particularly Iamblichus, they talk about these virtues, the acquisition of these virtues, as a necessity for theurgy. So they're actually prerequisites. And it basically starts out with civic virtue or a natural virtue. And that has to do more with like controlling your appetites, controlling your moods, your attitudes, making sure that you are following that, towing the line of equilibrium and not doing too much physical exercise where you're burning yourself out, and not having too much rest where you're becoming lazy, and you could burn your body out from resting just as much as you can from exercising, right? I mean, fucking bed sores and just, you know, losing all like elasticity in muscular tissue and tendons and things like that. So being lazy puts just as much stress on the physical body as too much rest, I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
As is tantamount in a lot of ways. It's different problems, but it's still problems than too much exercise. And it goes all the way up. It's kind of like this 7-runged ladder that essentially leads up to what are called the paradigmatic virtue. Okay, and so paradigmatic virtue is tantamount to the highest possible philosopher, somebody who understands these things because they have achieved a level of intellection and intellectual activity and a reconnection, a rebinding of the lower part of their soul to the higher. They've been rebound, so to speak, to their daimon, perhaps to greater forces, to larger forces. And then they are able to contemplate and deliver to humanity, to articulate and embody divine truth. Because being able to say it and not live it is not necessarily right then and there. That means that you haven't gone beyond the civic. You haven't mastered the civic virtue. You haven't mastered your ability to physically enact a certain thing in the world. And it's with the civic virtues that Blue Lodge Freemasonry is primarily concerned, most particularly in the entered apprentice degree. And then you ascend later. But the paradigmatic virtue is somebody now who not only can control their behaviors, but have linked themselves with something higher so that they can actually perceive capital T truth, capital G good, see it in the world, intuitively understand why and how, and then put that into action. And then, and only then, are you able to progress to theurgic virtue. It's only after becoming the perfected philosopher that you can become the theurgist. So you've got a lot of people running around out here in fucking cloaks and hoods and wooden wands, and it's like you can't even control your diet, and you want to get in touch with your daimon. You know, like you got a lot to do. Because what do you think the daimon's going to tell you? Go back, work on your diet. You know, like come back later. You know, like these are, when you get to the daimon, it's like if there's any weak link in the chain, it's gonna tell you, okay, we have to go back and aggressively focus on this thing that you fucking ignored until you fix it. And that's basically, you know, that's how it works. But the ladder of Platonic virtues, and Iamblichus gave a reading order. So he gave an order, and particular, there's 12 different Platonic dialogues, and he lists this order of how they should be read in order to, as a sort of curriculum, to instruct you in the civic virtues, the cathartic, the contemplative, the the paradigmatic. And then once you've mastered all these things, then you can get involved in theurgy. So I would put somebody on a course of that is essentially paideia, what Plato conceptualized as the education of the soul, right? Coming to know the capital G good, and the ladder of virtues, as they are called, and those, the way they kind of apply to your life. That is the training that I think everyone should undergo. And here's the thing. You know, we have this idea that if somebody is not perfect, they have no right to talk about morality. If somebody has been all too human and has fucked up and has cheated on their spouse, or, you know, overeats, or, you know, has been cruel or mean, or has said things that they regret, that somehow it's like, I don't listen to what you have to say. And some of that is justified, but some of it is unjustified, right? Because the thing is, like, sometimes it's the people who fucked up the worst that are in the best possible position to tell you, like, no, this is the wrong way. You're going down the wrong way. And especially if it's not something that person has channeled, right? But if it's these true and tested, methods, virtues, behaviors, ideologies that have been with us for thousands of years, if that's what they're telling you, if that's what they're admonishing people towards, that is valid, regardless of whether or not they fall short of the mark. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's what people get wrong about Christians. Like, oh, well, you're telling me I got to be perfect, but you ain't perfect. Yeah, but what the fuck is wrong with telling somebody that they should do better? Why can't, that's still a valid message. You don't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. People do that when they're not mature enough to be able to look at themselves. You know what I'm saying? Who are you to tell me? I know, if that's your reaction, I know I'm hitting a nerve. I know I'm hitting a nerve. I know that you should be and could be doing better, but you'd rather not because this is easy.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that notion too of the paradigmatic virtue. It's fascinating, and I wonder if this is related to the notion of this interior sort of discovery and rectification that you've previously spoken to, and there was something that you had also mentioned to me personally about alchemical vitriol and its connection with this. So I think that would be particularly interesting to get into as well.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on it at the end of our last conversation, where we were talking about, the alchemical formula of transmutation and how that's not only applicable to physical materia, but also just your psychology, to your spiritual development, because it's a holographic and fractal pattern that exists in all things at all times. It's essentially the Yod He Vav He formula. It's the tetragrammaton turning into the pentagrammaton. That's essentially what it is. But the thing that stuck out to you, obviously, your sort of forte, your milieu is alchemy. So it was interesting to me that what jumped out to you was you had said that you're very interested or fascinated in this idea of interior rectification. And I mean, that's the exact verbiage of, the alchemical axiom or principle of vitriol. It's, an anagram for the Latin visita interiora terrae, rectificando invenies occultum lapidum. So visit the interior of the earth, and rectifying therein, you will find the hidden stone. And sometimes you see it rendered as vitriol or vitriolum, because it's visita interiora terrae rectificando invenies occultum lapidum veram medicinam. Right? So it's appended to that idea of you will find the hidden stone is the true medicine. So visit the interior of the earth, rectifying therein, you will find the hidden stone, which is the true medicine. So that is, it doesn't tell you to go into outer space. It tells you to go inward. It doesn't tell you to criticize everything around you, maybe question everything around you, but first and foremost, question yourself, your motives, go in, see what's there. And that's part of that is the Negrito, right? Because at that point you make that cosmic apology, and it's devastating. It's one of those moments that you get to have if you're fortunate enough in this life where you say, oh my God, I'm heartbroken and I have to change. The more of those you get in your life, the luckier you are, but nobody wants to go towards it, and that is the beginning part, the blackening. That is you falling apart, allowing the dross to be burnt. And so that's, yeah, absolutely. I think that the vitriolum is, it definitely plays into the ladder of the virtues, because the ladder of the virtues tells you to do the same thing. It tells you to be self-critical and self-aware, right? Noti sauta, know yourself. And then in what Socrates says, right, that was one of the Delphic maxims. So it was supposedly, quote unquote, written over the over the gates to Delphi, the ancient oracular site of the ancient world. There were three. It was know yourself, nothing in excess, and make a pact, and destruction is assured. Not too many people know that last one, but know yourself and nothing in excess. Now, when Socrates expounds that, he adds to it in one of the dialogues, man, know yourself and you will know the universe and its gods. You are a microcosm. You are a miniature version of everything around you, the entire universe. By analogy, by principle, by essence, even to some degree by form, right? Our, one theory of one molecular theory says that all the atoms in our body are orbiting each other the same way the planets orbit a central solar body, so there are all these different like fractal analogies. And when you examine yourself and the proportion, the harmonia, the ratio within you, which is divine, you gain an awareness of the exterior. So like I was saying last time, it's really like if you constantly look outward, you're going to be nothing but confused. There are no answers in the exterior world. There are no answers in the exterior. Nothing is there. There's forms, there's clues, there's patterns, but there's no answers. The answers are within you, because your subjective experience of those forms is how you reconcile, you synthesize an intimate understanding of these things on the level of divine mind, right? Because that's what separates us from other beings. I don't care how intelligent you think apes and dolphins are. They can't speak like 5 different languages, like they can't use a fucking, a high level piece of machinery. Like we are, you minimize human beings as much as you want because you hate yourself, because you can't control yourself. Minimize people as much as you want, but we have magical fucking consciousness that approximates the divine mind. It's just an attenuated, fragmented version. So it's our minds, it's our consciousness, right? Mind being distinct from brain. The brain is not the mind, but it's our consciousness that will allow us to reconcile and synthesize and come to a personal understanding that transforms us, that adds to the structure of our consciousness, changes it at a fundamental level. We'll be able to have communion with these things in a way that's not possible in the physical if we go to an interior space and begin to contemplate them and look for them and search for the truth. And it's because it's not immediate, right? You have to unlearn what you've learned. You have to uncondition what has been relentlessly conditioned to the point where we take these base assumptions for granted.
Damn, you went hard on that. That was epic. Are there any other additional points in regards to any of these subject matters that you'd like to speak on before we kind of close out?
Well, I got a couple of things. I'm going to try and keep them short. A lot of people have sort of taken and run with this Eastern conception of non-attachment as the way to freedom. And I would agree with that. But I don't agree that non-action is a way to freedom. I think that there's this new age kind of influence on modern spirituality that has been reoriented towards the palliative by way of the commercial. They're trying to sell you shit. Or like not just sell you shit, but sell you shit that's going to make you a repeat customer. So in other words, like, you're not going to look for the truth. You're not going to look at the fact that like your spiritual thing for the day was that you spent $169 on fucking geodes and yoga pants. Congratulations. You're very spiritual today. They're not going to inculcate the reality of that situation to you. So they're going to keep lulling you into this state of just go with the flow and spend money. Buy the pants, wear the shawl, get the mala beads, wear the Hamsa bracelet, and just adorn yourself with the accoutrement of what a spiritual person looks like based off of the movies that we've shown you. When in reality, you need to have positive action in application, but you have to know when, and you have to know what. And a lot of people vilify the more unpopular traits, but they're here with us. They're here with us for a reason, and they gave us a lot of the things that we love, right? Courage, for instance, being one of the Platonic four virtues, wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance being the four traditional Platonic virtues. This is before the virtues, the latter of the virtues, the seven virtues were instituted, the theurgic prerequisites. And I think that it is that the Kabbalistic tree of life and the teaching of the Kabbalah as pertains to, that diagram and the teaching of the understanding of the Sephirot and the Navitot, the paths, that is actually the strongest course of education that you could receive, in the fact that everything that exists is on that tree. Everything that exists, because it's all of the essences, the subconscious materia of whatever is, creating this dream of existence. It's all there. And people vilify Gebura. They think of it as like, ooh, it's bad, it's dark. No. Nothing on the upright tree is out of balance. Nothing on the upright tree is wrong. There is an averse tree that descends downward. That is the cliphotic tree. Everything is at the entire raison d'etre of the downward tree is disequilibrium. It's only there because it's out of balance. But everything on that upright tree is completely necessary and viable when tempered with its opposite, right? Because mercy and severity harmonized culminate in beauty. They culminate in beauty, right? Chesed and Gebura culminate in Tefereth, and that is how it fucking works. So you need to be able to say, okay, let's say in my instance, I grew up a little hot-headed, was really bad, ruined a lot of relationships. It just kind of, I felt like I was digging a deeper and deeper hole, and I couldn't get out of it. And that's because I didn't have enough mercy to create beauty. It was all severity, mostly towards myself. Then I projected the frustration that caused, the self-loathing. I projected that frustration on my quote-unquote magical mirror of the universe, the 360-degree view that I have from within the center of my sphere of sensation, projecting that everywhere. So that's all I saw. That was all that was reflected back to me. Then when I began to rectify my sphere of sensation, doing the Kabbalistic exercises, undergoing initiation, centering myself in the heart, calling in these initiatic and initiating powers, I began to understand mercy. But the thing is, then people become in love with mercy, and they don't know how to temper it with severity. And that resistance to one or the other, if you're on the side of severity and you have a resistance to mercy, it takes courage to take that jump. If you're on the side of mercy and you have a resistance to severity, it takes courage to make that jump. And it takes wisdom, and it takes prudence. And you have to use these virtues, and the Kabbalistic tree of life is a tremendous aid to knowing, like, look, in order for me to set up healthy boundaries, I have to exercise a little Gebura force, okay? Not out of balance, but I have to exercise that Gebura force. It's completely natural. And I think that's, if you can exercise that without becoming invested in it, where the point was like, look, I'm going to present this honestly, right? Sincerely, but I'm not going to let myself get wrapped up in it. I'm not going to get to the point where I get nuts. That is positive action from a place of non-attachment. right? Because I'm not diving headfirst into the sphere of Gabora, pulling out my Mars sword and fucking, like just burning the fleet, burning the bridges. No, I'm not doing that. I'm trying to center myself in the middle and say, look, this severity will ultimately be a mercy. But I have to center myself at a point of balance and know, paradigmatically, contemplatively, this force must be applied here. It's almost like if you've ever done martial arts and you've done this kind of exercise, called like sticky hands or something like that. You're feeling the other person's force. And when they apply pressure, you recede. And then when they recede, you apply pressure. So it's this kind of intuitive understanding of the maintenance of equilibrium among a universe that is constantly in motion. And that is the practical key to a lot of the basic civic virtue and the natural virtue, the development, the cultivation of the self and the person. Get that sphere of sensation equilibrated. Figure out, strengthen the weak and purify the strong. Because you have to embody everything. You are the tree.
Damn. Well, first, I would like to say, first and foremost, God bless yoga pants. But yes, 100%. When you're just talking about like that sort of application of pressure and a degree of force, it reminds me a lot of like the Taoist teachings as well, which I think you do have a background in. So it's probably yes, incorporated a lot within your psyche. But I'm with you 100%, brother. I think that these virtues are so incredibly invaluable, and if only these were taught in every elementary or middle school, and just even from just parent to child, like I'm absolutely going to transmit this shit to my son 100%. Like the amount of times that my father told me patience is a virtue, I'm so thankful for that, just for that being instilled, like just those little comments here and there. And I could only hope for myself to proliferate and expand upon these virtues to the best of my ability, and kind of like set that foundation, and then hopefully set that foundation for a Kabbalistic sort of curriculum to further expand consciousness and whatnot. But I fucking love you, brother. This was epic. And where can people find more? Where can they listen to you, yourself, and any of your other stuff?
I love you too, dude, man. I really appreciate you having me just field these kind of questions that you come up with. I think that you are one of the people that I know that truly embodies a lot of the balance. And that's why I choose to work so deeply and get so invested in these things with you, because I don't do that with just anybody. But if you want to hear me rant for several hours, again, youtube.com/@arcanum, ARCANVM, and then all my other links to Facebook, Patreon, and Instagram will be there.
Excellent. If anybody wants to check out any of my stuff, check out the Philosophical Minds podcast on all the major RSS feeds, Spotify, Apple, all that good stuff. Check out the YouTube, and if you're listening to this on the RSS feed of any of those platforms, do consider checking out the Patreon at patreon.com/Aetherica. It would mean a lot, and if not, either way, every little bit of listening is just greatly appreciated. Definitely appreciate everybody who does listen to this podcast, even if it's so much as clicking a like button or sharing with a friend. That means the world. So thank you all, and till next time.
Good night.
All right.